Quite a few people have been asking me how I'm coming on my barn project. They want to know if I'm going to get my business open, and I think they wonder why it's taken the time that it's taken. So this little video will give you an update. The barn that I'm working on was built in 1890. It was built by my great-great-grandpa, Bill Willis. He had stitched together a farm of about 250 acres on what was called Willis Hill because his brother John B. Willis lived nearby, as did his nephew George Willis. So the barn was a bank barn. It was built on the foundation of a previous barn that had been struck by lightning and burned to the ground in 1890. It was built all from timber that had been cut on Bill Willis's farm. And by the 1960s, it had a loafing shed attached to the back where the cattle and sheep could get in and out of the weather, and it was easier to feed them in the wintertime. When I started on the project, one of the first things I had to do was put a new foundation under the barn. It had originally a sandstone foundation in the 60s that was replaced by a concrete block foundation, but the block really wasn't laid properly, so that foundation had moved. So we jacked the entire barn up off the foundation, demolished the old foundation, had a new one laid up out of block with pilasters and reinforcement the way it should have been done properly. On the back side of the barn, we had to do the same thing, although the wall was obviously shorter because it wasn't up against the bank. So again, jack the barn up off of its foundation, demolished the existing foundation, new footers, and then laid up a new cement block foundation that's all straight and level and should keep the barn solid for the next century. Then it was time to move outside and work on the siding, so we started stripping off the old poplar siding and replacing it with rough sawn red oak siding that I buy from the Amish community. I also replaced the entrance ramp and rehung the big doors, put up new track. And as we go along, I start battening. As the siding shrinks up, dries out, we put batten strips on it. Then it was time to move inside. So when you walk in the big front doors and turn to the right, there was a huge hay loft. And finally we got rid of all the hay and removed the partitions that separated that from the rest of the barn and started, first of all, on the floor, because the floor was just sort of loose planks. We were fortunate that all of the existing floor joists and the sill beam were really solid. And they were full-size 2x10s that had been mortised into about an 8x8 beam. So what we did was to take 2x6 joists, and in order to give it the support that it needed at every intersection of the new joists with the existing joists, we tied them together. So the new floor would have the strength of the existing 2x10 joists, even though they were only 2x6s. Made sure that everything was square, made sure everything was level, so we'd have a good, solid, safe floor for the visitors. Put down a subfloor out of what's called dry ply. It's a 3/4 inch tongue and groove plywood product, water resistant. Also built a performance area, put a stage up, tried to kind of make it look like an old porch. And you can see as we were removing the old poplar siding that had been painted, we're bringing that inside and rehanging it and keeping the patina of the old barn. Stage is all completed now, got a sound system, LED lighting, some interesting architectural details. All this time also bringing all the electrical up to commercial code with all the wiring being in conduit. All the light fixtures in the barn are now LED. We also put a new entrance into the barn, so when we're open for business, we won't need to have the big double doors open. We have this small human-sized door that's dumps you out right into the tasting area. And then it was time to turn attention to the other end of the barn. So what was if you turn left when you walk in the door, what was the north end of the barn is the north end of the barn, and again was a bunch of hay lofts. And this is what it looked like when I started. We have since partitioned it off to create a prep room where I'll be preparing the wine, an area for restrooms, and built this bar or counter, which would be for checkout as well as tasting. Added a couple of video screens for menus. They're not for watching sports. These are for our menu items and price lists. Then created this entrance into the prep room. Everything in the barn has been we tried to keep it with this sort of rustic look, except for this area, which is all made out of a food grade product called iSpan. It's all washable, so it can be hosed down, and this is where I will prepare the wine. And this is where we're framing in for handicapped accessible restroom, and a mechanical room where all the plumbing and gas and electrical comes up from the downstairs. And I think we're just about there. Hopefully we'll be open this summer with some retail activity. And I think my great-great-grandpa Bill Willis would probably be pleased with the improvements we've made on the barn. He was also a vintner and a distiller. This is some of the documentation that he had to complete every year. This was done in 1878 and documents how much he was producing with his copper pot still, which I still have. And he was making a lot of brandy and other fruit wines.